We love to romanticize the act of returning to an ex. We call it unfinished business, destiny, or the ever-popular deep, soul-level connection that transcends time. We tell our friends, and more importantly, we tell ourselves, that the heart simply knew where it belonged. We weave grand narratives about how no one else ever compared, how the chemistry was unmatched, and how the universe conspired to bring two magnets back together. It is a beautiful, comforting lie, a poetic shield designed to protect our ego from the actual, much grittier truth. You aren't returning because your soul is screaming for them. You are returning because you are terrified of the administrative nightmare of starting over. You aren't chasing a lost love, you are suffering from a chronic case of relationship inertia. The truth is that the discomfort of being alone, or the daunting prospect of building a new dynamic from scratch, feels far more agonizing than the familiar, albeit flawed, dysfunction of the past. We convince ourselves we are being sentimental when, in reality, we are just being profoundly lazy. We have already done the heavy lifting of mapping out another person's quirks, triggers, and domestic rhythms, and the thought of auditing a new candidate of learning how they take their coffee, how they handle stress, or what they sound like when they wake up on a Tuesday feels like a job we simply don't have the energy to apply for. Think about the sheer exhaustion of it. When you are with someone for a long time, you reach a state of domestic equilibrium. You know the exact cadence of their footsteps in the hallway. You know which topics are landmines and which are safe havens. You have a shared vocabulary of shorthand, a collective history that allows you to exist in the same room without the exhausting need to perform or impress. Bringing a new person into your orbit is an invasion of that hard-won silence. It requires constant calibration. It demands that you explain your weird habits, justify your weekend routines, and navigate the minefield of getting to know you small talk that inevitably feels like a slow, painful interrogation. We act like we are mourning a partner when we are actually just mourning the convenience of a system we already spent years perfecting. We miss the routine, not the person. We miss the safety of the known, not the thrill of their soul. You tell yourself, nobody understands me like them, but what you mean is, nobody else knows exactly how to navigate my baggage without me having to explain it all over again. It is a tragic surrender to the path of least resistance, disguised as a grand, sweeping gesture of devotion. This is the hidden tax of modern intimacy. We treat human beings like software interfaces. Once we have learned the controls, we find it incredibly frustrating to have to learn an entirely new operating system. You might think you miss the way they laughed, but try to be honest for a second. You mostly miss the fact that you don't have to work to be comfortable around them. You have already invested the emotional capital. You have already paid the tuition in tears and time, and the idea of starting over feels like flushing all that equity down the toilet. So, you circle back. You send the "I was just thinking about you" text, which is really just an invitation to resume the status quo because it is safer than the unknown. You ignore the red flags that made you leave in the first place because those red flags are at least familiar. You know their color, their shape, and how to dodge them. With a stranger, you don't know where the danger lies. The fear of the unknown is the most powerful anesthetic for the memory of why you broke up. We recycle relationships like we recycle old habits, not because they are good for us, but because they are already there, sitting in our pockets, requiring zero effort to put back on. The irony is that in your quest to avoid the labor of a new start, you are effectively trapping yourself in a museum of your own past mistakes. You aren't growing, you are just looping. You are staying in a house that doesn't fit you anymore, simply because you don't want to go through the hassle of packing your boxes and moving into a new neighborhood. Every time you return to that old flame, you aren't rekindling a fire, you are just warming your hands over the embers of something that burned out years ago. You aren't being romantic, you are being thrifty with your emotional output. You are deciding that the misery of the familiar is cheaper than the cost of the unfamiliar. And every time you make that choice, you lose a little more of your capacity to adapt. You lose the muscle memory for novelty. You become a prisoner of your own comfort zone, mistaking the lack of change for the presence of love. We have convinced ourselves that the one is the person who fits our current life perfectly, failing to realize that the person who fit your life a year ago is not the person who should fit your life today. If you have to suppress the memory of why you left to convince yourself to stay, you aren't in love. You are just bored, tired, and deeply, fundamentally afraid of the blank page that comes with meeting someone new. You choose the devil you know not because he is holy, but because you are too lazy to scout for a new one. Eventually, the realization hits you, usually at 3 a.m., in the quiet aftermath of a conversation that felt hollow despite the familiarity. You realize that you aren't fighting for your relationship, you are fighting for your comfort. You are clinging to the wreckage of a ship that sank a long time ago because building a raft feels too difficult. The tragedy isn't that you can't find someone new, it is that you have stopped looking because you would rather be unhappy in a way you recognize than take the risk of being happy in a way that is brand new. You are addicted to the shorthand. You are hooked on the efficiency of an old dynamic. But here is the truth. You will never grow if you keep returning to the same garden just because you already know where the weeds are. You are holding on to a ghost of your former self, protecting your laziness under the mask of a broken heart. Stop lying to yourself. Stop calling it destiny when it is clearly just a lack of courage to start from zero. You aren't going back for the love you lost. You're going back for the labor you refused to do.